Organized money.
I'm a big college sports fan. I went to the University of Michigan. We had a Heisman Trophy winner. We went to two Final Fours while I was there. I went to both of them. I went to Rose Bowls. I've been to three or four Rose Bowls. I'm a big college sports guy. Is that what do you you went to Harvard, so I don't know if that's the same thing with you,
Fight fiercely, Harvard. Yeah, but nobody cares about sports at Harvard sports. And uh, but I grew up in Miami, and in Miami, it was all about the Miami Hurricanes and like the
Right?
football team there because they were like the anti-establishment like team,
The
and
convicts, sometimes
yes, the convicts
yes.
in the was it
When they
Catholics versus
played Notre
convicts game,
Dame's,
right?
when they played Notre Dame, it'd be convicts versus Catholics,
But
right?
it was
Which
if
is
and
totally
you can
racist, by the way. But
yeah,
anyway, go
100%
ahead.
super racist. The but the you watch the 30 for 30 documentaries on the U and they're
Yeah.
awesome. They're so great and they're just like such a great illustration of this moment in American history when when college football moved from, big old marching bands to like hip hop and this like different like a rep like a lot more representing the athletes who are actually
I mean,
playing.
it's the same
Um
thing on when I went to Michigan, the Fab Five. They wore baggy shorts and they wore black socks and they had shaved heads, and people didn't know what to do with that. And they brought that new culture kind of to the game of college basketball, which was completely different prior to them.
and I think
And
that
yeah,
sorry, I feel strongly, I feel like this really changed American culture in like a very positive way. The college sports, this is like, I think, a foundational part of what it means to be an American is to participate in sports or to watch sports or to have views about sports. I mean, it really unified Miami. Like it actually really did. Miami had a lot of riots and stuff,
right,
but everybody kind of liked the Hurricanes. This is not a fake thing. This really
right.
did unify. Um,
Right. But the undercurrent underneath all of these positive things was this fact that the entire edifice was built on the backs of free labor. Right. So there's this inconvenient detail
that's
that
true.
college football, college basketball, these guys were making billions of dollars for their schools, for coaches, for administrators, and they weren't being paid anything at all. And within the last 5 years, that has changed, and it's freaking out the people that used to make all the money.
Yeah, so the that's right. The whole college athletics world is, which is controlled by the what is it, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, the
The
NCAA,
NCAA, yeah.
had these rules about you can't pay anyone, and that is completely out the window. And it's throwing they're all very mad about it. There's congressional action. It's like it's this fascinating moment, and it's going to continue for a while. And we have a great guest to talk about what's happening, the legal problems, the political dynamics, what's happening with athletes. Very cool.
Yeah, so we have Katie Van Dyck. She's a senior fellow where you work, Matt, at the American Economic Liberties Project, and she was an attorney advisor at the Federal Trade Commission. She's been working on the main legislative vehicle to try to save college sports, which is, basically stop players from being paid. She's been working on that on Capitol Hill. There was a big moment last week where a bill that was seen as the main vehicle here didn't get to the floor because it didn't have the votes. So it's an interesting dynamic that's going on, and we're going to talk to Katie right now about the changing landscape of college sports. Here we go. It's organized money.
Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification button so that more people can get exposed to organized money. Really appreciate it.
All right, Katie Van Dyck, thank you for being on Organized Money.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So, I mean, maybe we should start by describing just what a big business college athletics is now. Obviously, there are some sports that are sort of more amateur, and there are some sports that make all the money. But how much money are we talking about here, and how does that break out?
We're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to $20 million a year in revenue that is bouncing around college athletics.
I'm sorry. I think you said
The
million. You meant billion. Okay.
sorry, I'll start over.
Yeah.
We're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to $20 billion in revenue that is bouncing around college athletic programs. Over a billion of that alone is just from NCAA March Madness. Obviously, the schools at the top, the big college football programs, are the ones that are generating most of it. It's largely driven by media deals, particularly the SEC, the Southeastern Conference, and the Big Ten Conference, which have expanded um, to over 15 teams at this point, have deals that are close to $1 billion per conference, just with ESPN, Fox, that sort of
Hmm.
thing.
You grew up, so you grew up in Texas. What's your favorite team? Like, are you an obsessive fan? Like, let me ask you that.
That's a loaded question. Yeah, I grew up in Texas. I went to TCU, Texas Christian University, for undergrad, and I'm a Horned Frog fan. Unfortunately, the last great moment of Horned Frog football history was when they beat Michigan in the college football playoff. I think
Now,
it
come
was
on.
three
I'm a
years
Michigan
ago.
guy. I'm a Michigan
Ah,
guy.
yeah, you remember
How
that
do you
game
bring that
well.
up? Yeah.
Wait, is a
Yeah.
horned? What is a horned frog? I don't want to get into horned frogs, but I just want to
Horned
like,
frogs, a horned
yeah,
lizard, they shoot blood out their eyes when they're threatened.
okay.
That's good.
That
Wolverines actually don't exist in the state of Michigan. They're just really mean, and so it sounds cool to be the Wolverines.
um, I'm a Miami Hurricanes fan. But did you know that hurricanes are more scared of you than you are?
That's right. That's right.
That's this is not true. Um, okay, so so walk us through, like, there was this big change in college athletics in 2020, because like for most of my life, like I remember, NCAA, like there were always scandals because you're not allowed to get money if you're an athlete. How was college athletics organized prior to 2020? What is the NCAA, and how did they exert control on college athletics and colleges and athletes?
So the NCAA, I think people are pretty familiar with. They are essentially the governing body for all of college athletics. They set the rules for participation. They set the rules for divisions. What is required to be a Division I school? What is required to be a Division II school? What kind of college? Excuse me. What kind of athletic scholarships can schools give? How much? Prior to 2021, the NCAA had very, very strict rules about compensation, essentially meaning there was a very narrow category of money that schools could give to athletes. Schools were not allowed to share any of the media revenue that they got from television deals. Athletes weren't allowed to have their own endorsement deals. You couldn't get paid to be on a Wheaties box. You couldn't get paid for media appearances. So it was really this very, very, very narrow
Yeah.
window.
The
Um,
good old days.
the good old days. Um, they are referred to within the world of the NCAA as student athletes. That term actually came about from a lawsuit in the 1950s. A man he was a war veteran. He was and went back to school on the GI Bill in Colorado, to a state school in Colorado, suffered a traumatic head injury playing football and died. And
Mm.
his widow tried to get workers' compensation, and the court initially ruled in her favor. And that is the genesis of the term student athlete. The NCAA said, "Oh, we can't have our athletes be employees. This isn't going to work for us financially." And they convinced the court that they were not employees. So that's the genesis of that term. And that became the status quo from until 2021, when the Supreme Court ruled in Alston that these kinds of limits on compensation are not exempt from antitrust laws.
Right. Let's go through that because that's the big changes here actually happen through the courts. It's funny if I asked you, well, when did college athletes start getting paid? The answer is not 1865. The answer is 2021,
Correct.
and it happened in take us through just sort of these series of
Well,
lawsuits
hang
that
on a second.
that
I just
happened
want
here.
to point out the NCAA is a bunch of shadowy puppet masters, and they were always investigating the hurricanes, and people always hated them, and they've always been really evil. I just want to,
That seems very
I feel like
biased.
Mhm.
the shadowy
Seems
puppet masters who control college football. That's really what I was trying to get at with that question about who they are. Anyway, sorry. Take us
Yeah,
through
no, but
the
you're right. There's all this conduct that was considered outrageous and highly illegal from the hurricanes, SMU, and the death penalty that they got in the 1980s, that completely eliminated their football program for a few years. All of that was considered outrageous and is now how college football works. It's a
right.
big
Right.
turnaround.
But I mean, I was on a campus that had like University of Michigan, a big time campus in the 1990s, and athletes were getting paid. Like it was not maybe an over the table thing, but athletes were getting paid. Like
Mhm.
seeing a fellow freshman in a Lamborghini, there was stuff going on, and
Yeah.
you know, uh, there were some teams that were sort of, or some schools that were more lenient and looked the other way on it relative to others, I think. But what these changes through the courts that we want to talk about did is they kind of democratized that process, right?
Right. Right. And so when the Supreme Court said the NCAA is not above the law, that's a quote from the opinion, it completely changed athletics immediately. The NCAA immediately suspended their rule prohibiting NIL deals. And
NIL
then
stands for name, image, and likeness, right?
name, image, and likeness. So that basically means any kind of endorsement deal. And it opened up this enormous market. And so now you have athletes in all kinds of sports getting endorsement deals. Schools set up what are called NIL collectives, which are essentially organizations where boosters can give money. It's not considered a donation, but they can give money to these collectives to hand out to athletes. There's obviously really like higher profile deals. There was the Alabama quarterback that was in Diet Dr. Pepper commercials, but the rank and file of college athletes they might get somewhere from $600 to a few $1,000s for a deal to help them out
wait.
coming to
So
school.
so colleges are not allowed to pay athletes directly. Still, is that
No, that there are two
That
different
has
things that
that
happen, right?
the
Yeah,
these are two different things. So
right?
Alston jump started NIL. That's
right.
where NCAA said, okay, fine, you can have NIL deals. But they did not lift their rules banning other kinds of compensation from schools. What we have this year for the first time is colleges directly paying athletes. Because the NCAA doesn't want to admit that they're employees, they're calling it revenue sharing, but
Right.
which means like it's coming from their media deals essentially.
Right.
But that came out of a separate lawsuit, and so that lawsuit, the House lawsuit, was challenging all of these compensation related deals. They settled it. It got final approval this summer, and as a result of that settlement,
Right.
schools are under NCAA rules this year for the first time ever allowed to directly pay athletes beyond scholarships and what we call education related benefits.
Now, I think we can all look at that and say, if you're a normal person, you say, oh, the people that are actually generating all the value in this are actually getting paid for that value they generate. That's a good thing. I remember when I was in college, I was in college during the Fab Five era of the University of Michigan. There were these
Yeah.
five freshmen. And one of the emblematic stories was this guy, Chris Webber. He was from Detroit, Michigan, and he told this story where he saw his jersey hanging in the one of the big camp on campus stores there, and it was like $80 or something to buy a Chris Webber jersey. And he looked in his pocket and he had like 20 cents. Like he had not enough money to buy a hamburger, but his jersey with his name on the back of it was being sold for $80 in the bookstore. So I think in general, we can say, yeah, it's probably a good thing to pay the athletes here. But what
Well,
the
wait, actually,
NCAA is saying,
can I just ask about that for a second? Because like, has it changed the life of these of athletes, like the Alston case and the payments and everything? Like, has it changed the experience of being an athlete in college?
I think it has, and I've heard athletes talk. If big time program athletes were rock stars before, they're even bigger rock stars now because they're in national TV commercials, and they're some of them have multi-million-dollar endorsement deals with, Gatorade and Red Bull and Nike.
and
So yeah.
it's changed the sport in the sense that teams that were kind of perennial also rans can now drop a bag of money and get rid of it. Texas Tech is a good example. They
Yes.
just had a bunch of oil money and they bought a defensive line, and now they're one of the best teams in college football. So
Well,
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
changed
it's
that as
created.
well.
but I want to like highlight this point, which is that okay, we can look at it from the perspective of teams and from fans, but like it actually money is going to kids who are doing a job that they weren't getting before, and that is changing their life in a good way. Like that Chris Webber experience wouldn't have happened. But then there are also people that are getting, $600 to $5,000 or whatever it is. That's still money, right? Like as a college kid, like that actually is great to have, $1,000 to go out and even, go on a
Right.
date or whatever it is. Like I don't want to lose sight of the fact that like that's been a big deal and
Which
like a
is
big change for
which is
a lot of
why,
Absolutely.
people.
yeah.
And
Yeah, which
it's
is
been
why
a
it's interesting that what we hear about this constantly is that it's a crisis, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's interesting, right? I'm glad you said
19 year
that
olds
because
gonna get a little bit
they
of
talk
money. It's a
about this
crisis.
crisis.
Yeah.
It's been a huge boon for instance, some female athletes as well. So who are playing college basketball get NIL deals, and the WNBA president has even said this. It's great. They're coming into the WNBA with brands that are established. It's good for us, for these women to be able to capitalize on their brand in college and build that up and then bring it with them. One of the highest paid NIL athletes a couple of years ago was a female gymnast at LSU. And, so there's like, you see women in these other kinds of sports that involve a lot of performance getting like huge deals with makeup and
Hmm.
cosmetic
Hmm.
companies. It's created this whole new world of opportunity for
Right.
them. And the Wild West is, a lot of the Wild West is talking about the fact that NIL is used to recruit athletes. Like you just said, I went to Texas Tech for law school. I'm a Red
Okay.
Raider, and it's
Yeah.
very exciting to watch. Um,
A horned frog and a red raider.
Yes.
Horned Frog first, Red Raider second,
Okay.
definitely. But
There's
that's
a
the
hierarchy.
hierarchy.
Okay.
There is.
Okay.
But yeah, it's created this parity with teams that's also really interesting in that you have Texas Tech is ranked number 4.
In
Indiana beat Ohio State on Saturday in the Big Ten championship game and is the number 1 team in the country going into the college football playoffs. You have George Marshall and Tulane are also in the college football playoffs because they won their conferences. So it's when you hear a lot of these administrators from conferences and coaches talking about the Wild West, it's the people at the top of the food chain who don't like what's happening underneath them with this parity.
Right, exactly. I mean, I think the core question here is you said at the beginning, we're talking about 15 billion, $20 billion involved in college athletics. And yet, what we hear from the top schools and the NCAA is there's just not enough money. We're scrambling for capital. We have to cut these other non-revenue producing sports. If there's so much money sloshing around with all these media deals and there's so much money, from NIL deals, which is not coming from the university itself. It's coming from boosters and fans and things like that. How can we reconcile that? What does it mean that the NCAA or college sports is in crisis if there's all this money sloshing around?
Well, I mean, first of all, we've seen this year in particular this huge round of coaching changes where there's over $100 million in coaching buyouts. So it's
Right.
really, I think, about reorganizing budget priorities. And the schools and the NCAA are just unable to adjust to this new world they're living in, where some of these spoils have to go to the athletes. I mean, in the NFL, they don't have this problem, right? And they share 50% of their revenue with players. In college sports, that the cap is 20%.
Yeah, there's a cap
So,
on revenue. That's a very important thing to point out that yes, college schools are directly paying players, but there's a cap
mhm.
of 20% of their revenues. And they kind of can't handle this. They can't handle it.
So
And you mentioned these buyout deals. So yeah, people like James Franklin of Penn State or some of the other major coaches, Brian Kelly, they're getting like tens of millions of dollars to not coach,
Yeah.
right?
LSU
so
is
wait,
paying three coaches right now. They're paying Brian Kelly. He's got a 50
Right.
something $1 million buyout. The guy he replaced, Ed Orgeron, had a almost $20 million buyout. And then they just hired Lane
Lane
Kiffin
Kiffin.
for almost 100 million,
That was funny.
so
The
wait,
like
is
$100
it
governor,
million deal.
would it be fair to say that the crisis is that the shadowy puppet masters aren't getting all the money now? Is that
Yes, I think that's a
okay?
completely fair characterization,
That
Matt.
that is okay. So let's just be clear
right.
that
Mhm.
when the shadowy puppet, and this is actually across industries, when shadowy puppet masters don't get all the money, it's a crisis. Just so
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
organized money listeners,
Mhm.
And
that's
and
the definition of a crisis.
And
and
they're also having to, this year, they're feeling it more acutely because they're having to pay the damages part of the settlement from the House case that we just talked about. So all the
right.
schools had to pay into that. And so they have this added expense, one-time expense of a settlement this year, and they're in a
Hmm.
total
Okay,
panic.
all right. So they're paying settlement money. They're also paying a bunch of coaches to not coach, and they're not the shadowy puppet masters aren't able to gorge on everything. They can only get 80% of the money, not all of the money.
Right.
This is a real problem. So let's talk about our politicians and what they're doing about it, about this terrible crisis
Because
of shadowy puppet masters not getting enough.
one thing
Okay,
we
so
know is that in Washington, politicians respond to shadowy puppet masters.
that's true. Somehow there's like, what is Jeff Epstein doing about this? All right, let's start. Okay, so Trump did an executive order on saving college sports. Congress recently held a vote on something called the SCORE Act, and that is perceived as a kind of remedy for this crisis. And by the way, I'm going to make the shadowy puppet master joke like 3 or 4 more times. I don't care if it's funny or not.
Right.
Um, and when you turn on a college football game, you will see in between all the gambling ads for Pass the Score Act or other approaches. So what is behind the Score Act? What would the Score Act do? What are some of the politics here?
So the SCORE Act is the NCAA's not pet project. It is their big goal. What the NCAA wants more than anything is an antitrust exemption. They want to be able to set the rules of college sports, including how much money athletes can make without having to worry about antitrust laws because they keep getting sued for violating them. Um, the SCORE Act would create it's been sold to the public and to athletes and to people on the Hill and their staffers as protecting college students' NIL rights because it has one sentence in it that says schools can't limit um, they call them student athletes. Schools can't limit college athletes in NIL compensation,
Hmm.
except for in all of these other ways that we're going to allow. So it's an exception that swallows the entire rule, and it creates this exemption that gives the NCAA unfettered unilateral authority to limit how much compensation athletes can get, to create limits on transferability, to limit their eligibility, to limit what schools can participate in college athletics and what divisions they can be in and whether they can compete in competitions. It even gives them unfettered ability to set compensation for college athletes' agents and decide who can be an agent and who can't be. So it is an incredibly broad exemption that is, I think, unprecedented in the world of antitrust that we all operate
So,
in.
so it seems to kind of solve the crisis by returning things to 1958. Like that's
Yes.
kind of what you're telling me.
Or even returning things to 2020, David.
Or even, yeah, I suppose. I mean, one of the, what kind of gives the game away to me in reading the SCORE Act is that it says it codifies that student athletes are not employees. Like that kind
Yes.
of tells you exactly what it wants to do to student athletes.
I like the idea
It wants to
that
take away their rights completely.
there's a provision of it that says Chris Webber has to go back with 20 cents in his pocket and just
Right.
look at a jersey of his that's on sale for $80.
Right.
Just has to. I don't know why that's in the bill. It's weird, but he has
It
to.
is odd. It is
Yeah.
odd.
Also, it's
Um,
1985 again,
right.
somehow.
Uh, Yeah, and so, but I think what's interesting, so take us through kind of the legislative process, because I guess Democrats and Republicans had different bills. The SCORE Act is the House Republican bill, but it didn't get sort of, unanimous pickup among Republicans. There's been a lot of opposition to this bill. So you've been working on it. Tell us about, what happened in the last few months.
Well, it was introduced this summer, and it was introduced with 5 or 6 co-sponsors. They actually got 2 Republicans on board, or sorry, 2 Democrats on
Hmm.
board as co-sponsors, Bynum and Shamari Figures from Alabama. Um, but this was the culmination
And
of
Bynum's from
lobbying.
Oregon and Shamari Figures from Alabama. So
Yeah,
just two of the biggest schools in the
yeah,
country
yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of college football.
Um, It's the culmination of a lobbying effort. The NCAA and the conferences and administrators have been on the Hill trying to get this into get this legislation going since the Alston decision in 2021. The last reporting that I saw on this was that they spent about $15 million in
Hmm.
lobbying fees trying to get this thing through. And that was 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago. So who knows what the number is at this point. Um, the politics of this were challenging because the schools really want this law too, right? They want to have this exemption. They view it as beneficial to them to not have to pay their players. And
Right.
so you have members of Congress from both sides of the aisle getting calls from huge schools that are in their districts from Michigan. So it creates a lot of pressure on them. And so it took a lot of work to explain, like, this actually isn't like particularly for the smaller schools. The financial situation has been really difficult for instance, HBCUs. So that was a big challenge.
Hmm.
And and then you had this other odd factor where the same guy, Cody Campbell, who was largely funding the Texas Tech NIL recruiting, also got involved and was initially opposed to the bill for much of the summer and fall because he doesn't believe the NCAA should have an antitrust exemption, and he has his own idea about how to, quote, save college sports. That's his organization, and he runs his own commercials on all of this.
Hmm.
So there was really a sort of like frenetic situation that came to a head. It was supposed to go to the floor for a vote last Wednesday and got pulled at the very last minute because they didn't have the votes. And I think they were about 12 Republican members short to get it through.
Hmm.
So, so can you talk a little bit about the kind of streaming media consolidation, ESPN college football, or basketball and college conference realignments that are happening at kind of are they? I know it's a lot of weird stuff that's going on. Disney bought Fubo, ESPN, grabbing a bunch of college football conference rights and basketball rights. Like, what is that being driven by the changes in player compensation, or is that on a separate track?
I think it's on a separate track. I haven't really, that's interesting that you point that out, and I haven't really thought about it that way to date. I see it as when people talk about conference realignments, what they really are, they're mergers.
Hmm.
They're not, it's not just like a little shuffling around. What's happening is the Big Ten is, they have football games that are on playing on ESPN and Fox on on the East Coast and in the Midwest. They want to have media rights that they're getting paid for through midnight Pacific Standard Time. So they bring in schools, so they go and they convince schools to join their conference that are on the West Coast. Same for the
Yeah.
ACC, which is the Atlantic Coastal Conference, has schools that are on the West Coast now. The
Yes.
SEC has expanded to 16 teams. This is about media. These realignments are clearly not about like regional conferences or anything like that. It's about media rights. It's about getting more and more rights to get more and more money. And
Yeah.
and
It
at
was always
some
that
point,
way. Like a decade
mhm,
ago, the Big Ten took Rutgers in, and Rutgers
mhm,
isn't like a very powerful, or they haven't been traditionally a football power, but it's in the New York market. So it was a way to get the
mhm,
Big Ten network into the New York market. And
mhm.
the same thing for the University of Maryland to get the DC market. And it's funny to me that, one of the things that colleges are talking about why there's a crisis is that, oh, we have all these new travel costs. Travel costs are exploding. Yeah, when Rutgers versus UCLA is a conference game, yeah, then travel costs are going to explode if you're not driving down the street and it's not a regional conference.
Or
Also,
David, when those schools say, sure, we'll participate in the new basketball tournament in Dubai next year, that's going to add to your travel costs.
Right.
I mean, it's just so strange. It's like we they're supposed to be college students, right? And they're like, "Oh, what are you doing this week? I'm going to Dubai to play in a college tournament,
Right.
or I'm going to go from New Jersey to California to play." It doesn't. They're not. It just feels like there's something off about the idea that these are sort of student athletes, really even part of the
Right.
sort of college community and academic,
It's
that
it's all
Yeah.
academic
about
world.
it's all about media. And when Rutgers came into the Big Ten, there was a website I read that called them the Rutgers cable subscribers. Like that was the only reason that they were coming into the Big Ten. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
and
I
yeah,
sorry.
no,
I
go
was
ahead.
going to say, I think travel pressures are like probably the top indicator of the hypocrisy of the NCAA when it says we just want to protect them as students. We're worried, a lot of the Wild West concerns are about about athletes transferring freely between schools. We want to protect, we're worried about them completing their degrees and what kind of coursework will transfer. Well, if that is actually the concern, then why are we putting these travel pressures on these kids? And it's not just the football team and the basketball team that are having to travel, right? And like particularly the big programs have a
Right,
private jet that they can fly the team around on. But a kid on a swimming team or on
right,
like a gym or a gymnast isn't traveling on a private jet. They're traveling coach across the country on a 6 hour flight to go compete in a pretty like physically grueling event and also expected to like wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to take a test online
right,
before they go in. And so the idea that, that the NCAA's top concern is preserving their student status is pretty laughable.
yeah. And to me, that's why I'm a little concerned. So as you say, the SCORE Act didn't get a vote last week because it didn't have the votes on the Republican side. But when you hear Republicans talking about this, like I heard a speech from Chip Roy, who is opposed to the bill, and it seems like what he's focused on is that the college football playoff is bad. And
Hmm.
certain rivalry games aren't being played anymore. It's like
Yeah.
he's not necessarily concerned about the sanctity of the
Well,
student
it,
athlete or
it,
anything.
it is kind of funny that it's like nostalgia versus nostalgia. Like, oh, I wish we could go back to the
Right.
time when student athletes weren't paid. He's like, yeah, but I want different rivalry. Like, I want my rivalries from like,
Right.
and then
Right.
someone else is like, yeah, but I want Chris Webber to have to stare at the thing he can't afford. Like, it's just But a lot of the professional associations, the NFL Players Association, and and a bunch of the unions for the professional players, most of whom were college athletes,
Hmm.
they've all come out against the SCORE Act, and then some of the WNBA Players Association have come out against the SCORE Act. So there is real opposition here. But what are like colleges are coming up with sort of weird ways to fund their operations now
Hmm.
to like avert the crisis, right, of shadowy puppet masters not getting enough. So like in Louisiana, they're talking about devoting state revenue from sports betting into athletic programs. Uh, that seems awful.
It seems exactly right for Louisiana, though.
That's fair.
Yes.
Fair. Okay, it's good. Never
Fair,
mind. It seems
fair.
on brand.
Yeah.
But I mean, for Las Vegas, maybe like Louisiana, I feel like they need something different and bad. But like somehow like you're playing football and drilling for all. I don't know what it would be. But anyway, let's you know. So what are some of these schools doing, and like what kind of additional horror shows are they trying to engineer?
Well, I mean, private equity really, really wants in on the college football money.
Yeah.
And there've been a lot of schools and conferences that have been in conversations with big investment firms about setting up their media rights in a separate outside entity. So for instance, the Big Ten was in talks with with the University of California Investment Fund about buying a 10% stake in all of Big Ten media rights that would go through 2046. People thought it was going to go through, but Michigan, David, and USC
I had
had a
nothing to do with
problem
it,
with
but
it.
yes. Yes.
They had a problem with it. They realized like what are, first of all, this is a lot of these schools are public schools. They're public entities. These are public properties that we're selling off stakes where we're selling off stakes to a private investment company. What's that going to mean for our future? It also required extending the grant of rights, which is the grant of media rights by the school to the conference by an additional 10 years. And so it's really handing over a level of control to an outside organization over brands that are huge and really, really valuable. Michigan, Ohio State. There have
Mm-hmm.
been talks about this happening, I think, in the SEC. I know in the Big 12, there have been talks
Mm-hmm.
about it happening.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when you hand over that really, really valuable IP to a private investment firm? Um, there's also a company called Smash Capital that's trying to get a super league going that would basically cut all the small schools out of the football money and create like a 50 to 75 team super league for college football funded by private equity. Um, and I can
Does
go
does,
on, but I'll
does
take a
private
pause.
equity
There's more.
does private equity just kind of feel left out whenever there's like a conspiracy of shadowy puppet masters that they're not a part of? Is that what it is? Is PE
Hey,
just sort of are they like, oh, I see that people are not getting paid for their work. Let
that's
me
our
in.
thing. Yeah.
How dare
There's
you?
There's a company called Elevate. I was listening to this guy from this company, Elevate, that has a new $500 million fund for college athletics. And their goal, this guy goes on this podcast and says his goal, he thinks that colleges aren't charging enough money for their stadiums and their stadiums are too big. And they want to come in and turn the college football experience, which he says is not exciting, into an F1 or US Open luxury experience and downsize the stadiums and build more luxury suites. That's the goal of the private equity firms in
Well, do they
college
have? I
football.
mean, I'm a little offended he didn't put surveillance pricing in there
Yeah,
or
right.
personalized pricing because what is college football without dynamic pricing and luxury boxes? It just feels like
Mhm.
I
peanut butter
mean,
and
I mean,
chocolate or
you
something.
you joke about that, but the the whole concept of you have these fans that are often alumni of the schools. They have this connection from their early late adolescence, their teenage years. They have this real emotional attachment to these schools. And they're going to watch and they're going to, go to the games. They're going to even pony up to NIL collectives. They're going to do that because there is this significant attachment there.
Hmm.
And uh, it seems to me like these private equity guys that get involved in that thing, oh, wait, we've got a really captive audience here. We've got an audience that we can really, really exploit, and we can exploit their willingness to pay in a big, big way.
This guy said, we've done surveys and these young people, they want the luxury experience at college football games and they can't afford it, but if we give it to them, they'll find a way to pay for it.
Exactly. I mean, if you're a fan of Alabama or Auburn, these crazy fans that travel and go to the ends of the country, one end to the other to travel with the team on a weekly basis, yeah, you can exploit them. You can exploit the
Hmm.
hell out of them. I think it's just really interesting to see the financialization of this sport and of this experience play out in this way.
It just kind of curious about, like, are there sports that are not being affected by this situation, right? Like ultimate frisbee, is that being affected? But
I
I
have
mean,
no idea what's going on in Ultimate
I don't
Frisbee.
know.
I,
I mean, I'm
I
just
did
sort of
not
like,
prepare for that
is
question.
this
I
just
mean,
like a baseball and football thing, or is it,
well, there's kind of
oh,
mid-tier sports, right? I mean, basketball and football are really the revenue producers. But then, you have hockey and baseball and, like you said, gymnastics and some of these other sports that have upped their game in terms of NIL money. But, what's happening in those lower tiers where they are more like student athletes.
Yeah, and that's where things do start to get more challenging in college athletics because the schools are trying to, recruit, they're putting all this money into college football, but they're also trying to maintain what people call non-revenue generating sports, which are mostly Olympic sports, which is the
Right.
primary way our Olympic sport program is developed in the United States is through universities. And so
Right.
that is legitimately causing a lot of consternation and challenge about how do we keep funding these programs when we're also, paying our coaches $90 million a year and opening diamond plated facilities for the football players.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing. Like in many, many, many states in the country, the number one best paid public employee is the football coach
Hmm.
of the
Hmm.
public university. Um, so, I mean, what do you think the better solutions are out here that protect players' rights, that protect their labor rights, but also sustains college sports for the future?
The big obvious one that people who want to protect college athletes keep clamoring for is collective bargaining rights for athletes. So because they are not treated as employees right now, they are unable to unionize. But that is the main way that large leagues like the NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL all have huge players associations and they negotiate collective bargaining agreements that are hundreds of pages long and they deal with all of the issues that college athletes are facing right now without any kind of representation or bargaining power. From practice safety, practices and games, concussion protocols, how much salary caps, all of these things. And the big kicker that makes this an even more obvious solution for the NCAA and the schools is that if your players are unionized, then you can, as a league, collectively bargain with them and not have to worry about the end result being an antitrust violation. There's this exemption to antitrust law that allows employers on the other side to form a collective bargaining unit and bargain together with the
Mm.
athletes to come up with something that works for everybody. And when you think, and if you do that, then that's going to really sort out a lot of these problems in terms of like how much money, how many players can be on a team, how much revenue can you share with them, what's the cap on how much you can share with them, and it makes it easier to police to prevent sort of like pay to play that a lot of people don't like. There's always these anti-circumvention measures that the leagues have themselves. We've seen that come to light with the recent Clippers controversy. And so it really solves a lot of the problems. But what it requires is treating the athletes for what they are, which is a employee of sorts for these schools. And the NCAA does not want to do that.
So we've done a lot of complaining because we're liberals. That's what we do. But I want to to me, I look at this and I think this is kind of a cool story, right? A positive story. 5 years ago or 6 years ago, nobody was getting paid. I mean, sorry, I shouldn't say nobody. The coaches were getting paid. The administrators were getting paid. There were a lot of people making a lot of money, but the actual people doing the work weren't getting paid, right?
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people who do the work are actually getting paid, and that's a good thing, you know. And there's a lot of really interesting sort of chaos, which I'm a troll, so I enjoy that. But it's like this is a sort of area that did need to be shaken up, and so I think that's pretty neat. And then the SCORE Act didn't pass, right? I mean, it could come back, and there's a lot of interest in sort of restoring the power of our shadowy puppet masters, because that's always a thing. But this is kind of like a great. To me, this is a story of how actually, if you enforce antitrust law, it even in a modest way, which I think Alston was a pretty modest decision, it can have all of these good impacts. But where do you see the politics of this going? I mean, what are they going to bring the SCORE Act back and pass it? Like what's going to happen here, or what do you think is going to happen here? Let's say Congress changes. Like, where are the politics of this aligned to go?
That's a great question. And I think that there are a lot of other bills out there that have been introduced that actually do protect NIL rights. They correct a egregious situation that's happening with international students who can't have NIL deals under the terms of their visa to be here. So there's bills that address that. There's a bill from Chris Murphy and Summer Lee that would explicitly give athletes collective bargaining rights. So there's still a lot that's out on the table. The question is how. It's a great question, Matt, because the NCAA has a lot of money and they're still going to keep pushing for this. But I think the SCORE Act getting pulled last week was a huge political event and a huge win because it was also the second time it's been pulled from the floor. They cannot get their votes together. They actually, the version that went to the floor was worse than the version that came out of committee. And so that's a big win. And I think that for now, it might just be kind of seeing where things go with college athletics because a lot of people have said is, why do we need to change this? It's too soon. We don't know where college athletics is even going at this point. It changes every day. I write about this topic and it's really challenging to write about because you finish your draft and it's ready to go to print and then three things change like the day before it's going to get launched and you have to go change it again.
Right.
It's a really, really interesting situation to be watching. And I hope that we're heading towards collective bargaining and some sort of employee status for college football players and basketball players and the athletes who really are doing significant work and are under significant control of their schools.
Yeah, it's a turbulent system, but the static system was really, really bad for the people who created the value. So we'll
Hmm.
continue to take a look at it. Katie Van Dyck, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. It's fun.
Organized money.
I've done some work on the problem of the business of sports, and people think sports is one thing, but it's actually not. There's lots of different sports. They all have different dynamics. There are
Right.
youth sports, there's college sports, there's professional sports, there's minor leagues, there's different streaming services. And when you really get into it, what you realize is that this stuff is just a mirror for what's happening in the rest of the business world and actually just the rest of America.
100%. I mean, and you go down the line. I mean, youth sports are being financialized, college athletics, there's a lot of big money coming in. And the pro sports, you have these oligarchical owners who, get cities to spend on these pleasure palaces, these giant stadiums, spend public money on them down the line. And that's why this story actually I think is so interesting because here's a moment where the little guy, which in this case is the athletes who were basically creating all the value, struck back and they succeeded. And the puppet masters, the shadowy puppet masters, can't handle it. They can't handle the fact that they have to give even a little bit of their money that they have to break off to the people that everybody goes to a college football game or a college basketball game to see.
Right. The what is it? The spirit of amateurism, and
Right,
and
right,
that leads us to want to fairly compete in Dubai,
right,
for
right.
volleyball or whatever.
Or on
Right.
an aircraft carrier. That was
Right.
another. There was an actual basketball game played on an aircraft carrier a few years ago.
That sounds cool, honestly. I'm sorry, I'm on team aircraft carrier, but no, I think that what we are seeing is the same dynamic is playing out in the rest of the economy. The shadowy puppet masters usually win, but you also see the pushback really happening through a variety of mechanisms. And one interesting dynamic here is that though it really is a labor dispute, it's actually not happening through labor law. It's happening through antitrust law,
Right.
which is very different. Not sorry, I shouldn't say it's very different. It shows that people think of antitrust law as this kind of narrow thing that has to do with consumer prices or that has to do with competition or sort of stuff that doesn't really involve them. But in this, but that's not true, right? Antitrust is really just one, and so labor law, all of these things are just mechanisms to structure markets, and how we structure markets is how we structure labor, and how we structure culture, and how we structure all of these other things. So it's like I don't know if they're going to be able to get the SCORE Act through, but it does seem to me like if there is a broad push against oligarchy in general, and it does feel like the country's kind of heading there, although with
Hmm.
who knows how long it'll take to get there. We will see college sports get reorganized in a way that's
Yeah.
I think even more positive than what's happened over the last few years.
I do think they might get it through just because it seems like the opposition to it is more along the lines of, well, I don't like this bill because it doesn't make Florida State the number one team in the country. So if they can iron that part of it out, I feel like there's a
Well,
coalition.
there are dumber reasons that bills haven't gotten through. So let's
That's true.
I mean
That is
that's
true.
you're not wrong. I mean the other thing is I have to say, and I don't want to get super partisan here, but I think there's something very weird about all of these like Republican members of Congress who are just sitting there reminiscing about their college,
Right.
like at their college,
Right.
and then talking about and then being like, I want to help, I want to help, like basically, they're just like really into the SEC. I mean, I guess they all represent those
Right.
regions, but to me it's just weird. It's just like what, like it was college. Like okay, fine, cool, you like it, but why are you scoring the athlete? Like it doesn't make any sense to me. I don't
Well,
know.
these colleges, keep in mind, are also very large employers in these states and districts. They're very
Yeah,
important to
but
the
I don't know.
communities. So they're
I don't.
trying to give back to, large colleges that are their benefactors in some way or another.
I mean, yeah, I guess so, but I just feel like it's like the guys like I really like Alabama and I want Alabama to win. I mean,
Right.
to me, it's
But
a lot more like
the
this is
the
culture.
guy that really likes Alabama and wants Alabama to win is also maybe a billionaire, like has been giving
Well,
money to
there's yeah.
Alabama's NIL collective and is also giving money to their representative in Congress to fix
I
this.
guess the one other thing is that you know, prioritization is I think what makes me think this is about culture because
Yeah.
they could do Congress could focus on many things. And what are they really focusing on? They're focusing on like crypto, right? Which is purely about money,
Right.
right? And then they're focusing on this.
Yeah.
They're not doing anything with PBMs. They're not doing anything with like any sort of food expense, nothing, right? Like
Right.
there's a ton of things they could deal with, but it's like they've chosen this and then they've chosen crypto. And
No,
there is
nobody's,
$15 million.
yeah.
It's not that much money here.
Nobody's life will be made better if, uh, you know, suddenly the University of Alabama doesn't have to compete with Texas Tech over certain recruits, right? The only people whose lives will be made worse are those recruits who won't make as much money, or some maybe won't make any money. But there is this kind of opiate for the masses kind of going on here that, yeah, those guys in Congress, they made Alabama the best team in the country. So I'm going to vote for them again. It's not really making anybody's life better. Maybe psychically it is, but that's the only thing.
I guess so. And I guess the final, it's the other thing that is weird about it is that progressives don't seem to care.
Yeah.
I don't like, it's like people, we have our like, I like the college team I root for, but then outside of that, you're like, I don't really care. This isn't a thing that is a big
Right.
deal. But it involves everything that you would think progressives care about: labor, corporate power, private equity, athletics, and amateurism. Like there's all of these culture, there's all these core questions. So I don't know, maybe that'll
Yeah,
change.
and I like what you said. It's a microcosm for the challenges in the greater economy around financialization, around corporate dominance, and those kinds of issues. And so if we can deal with it and find a success story out of that where the producers of the value of the good and service actually are paid commensurate with that, we can do it here, we can do it in the rest of the economy as well.
There we go. Well, next week we'll have another good episode of Organized Money, and talking about another monopoly or monopoly problem.
Organized money.